Could some of the toughest federal regulations on marijuana soon go up in smoke? Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina just introduced a bill on Monday that would decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. Here's what the States Reform Act would do. It would, among other things, strip cannabis of its classification as a Schedule I drug, which makes possession of marijuana a crime. It would allow for the expungement of federal convictions in nonviolent cases. There would be a framework for federal regulation and enforcement in states that allow marijuana sales. It would also establish cannabis regulations as well, establishing regulations similar to those restrictions on alcohol. And in addition, it would call for a 3% federal excise tax on marijuana. But can it get passed and get the support of fellow Republicans? Well, here to answer that question, Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina, who introduced that bill. Congresswoman, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. And I understand you've managed to wrangle a number of Republican co-sponsors as well so far. So what's been your pitch for this bill to your party?
Well, so far, this is a bill, the States Reform Act, that brings together elements from previous pieces of legislation filed by Republicans, but also Democrats. I believe no matter your party or political affiliation, there's something in here for everyone. And there are a number of Republicans. We have 5 original co-sponsors, and we're going to get a few more. And this will be a bipartisan piece of legislation. And the number one thing that I want folks to know is that this is a turnkey federal tax and regulate policy and bill that would allow, if you're legal, whatever level you're legal in your state, you get to stay that way. So my home state of South Carolina, we permit CBD. Florida has medical, California has adult recreational use. And the bill recognizes that every state is different. So this wouldn't change anything for the states, but it would allow the federal government to tax it, regulate, get out of the way, to let states do what they're already doing. And there are only 3 states in the nation that have absolutely no type of cannabis reform, and it's past time that federal law catches up to what's already legal in 47 of 50 states.
There's a chairman there named Drew McKissick, chairman of the South Carolina GOP. As you probably heard or at least read, he said in a statement, quote, unequivocally, the South Carolina Republican Party is against any effort to legalize, decriminalize the use of controlled substances, and that includes this bill. That would seem to be quite the big bucket of cold water, Congresswoman. From your own party, were you taken aback at all by that response? And what is your response to that statement?
Not at all. In fact, South Carolina, bright red Republican South Carolina, already permits CBD and hemp in the state of South Carolina. And in fact, medical marijuana, medical cannabis legislation is being led by Republicans in the state legislature. And the South Carolina Compassionate Care Act gets a hearing in January. This is an issue that I worked on as a state lawmaker previous to coming to Congress. I ran on this in my campaign. And South Carolina has already had cannabis reforms led by a Republican legislature and a Republican state, and there's more to come there. So this is not really a partisan issue. There are Republicans and Democrats alike. This really is a 70-30 issue, not only across the state of South Carolina, but you see it in polling in every state in the nation. A supermajority of Americans on both sides of the aisle support and live in states that already have some level of cannabis reform between CBD and medical and hemp and full recreational use.
Well, I have you. I do want to talk to you about some of the other action that's happening there in D.C. President Biden, as you know, just signed the Bi-Partisan Infrastructure Bill into law. Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn, the lone Democrat in your delegation who also voted for the bill, he noted that $6 billion will head to South Carolina as a result of this bill. And for folks listening on Sirius Satellite Radio, Sirius XM, we've got a graphic up, and I'll read some of where this money is going to go. More than $1 billion going towards repairing structurally unsound bridges, improving water and wastewater infrastructure, upgrading airports, for public transportation, for electric vehicle charging stations, and to expand high-speed broadband, which is critical to more rural parts of South Carolina, as you know. You voted against the bill. Why?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I know that it's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, but in the House, we're the only chamber that has a Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Republicans were blocked out largely during the markup process on this bill, including the ranking Republican on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. I did work to get some funding in for South Carolina and the Low Country in the district that I represent, but we could have done a lot more with less. This particular bill, there's only 3% dedicated in the $1.2 trillion that goes to roads and bridges, which is not enough in this case, where 97% of the bill doesn't have anything to do with that. And so I just felt like the 42 new taxes in the bill, it not being paid for, that during this time coming out of the pandemic is going to put some stressors on our economy. But there's no doubt that infrastructure is needed across the country. And now that it's been signed into law, hopefully we see some of that money doing what it needs to do. But I worry that 97% of it has nothing to do with roads and bridges, and that's going to be problematic.
Just a few hours from now, as you know, the House expected to vote on whether to censure your fellow Republican Paul Gosar of Arizona, strip him of his 2 committee assignments.
And there's a loud sound behind me. Can you repeat that? I couldn't hear that.
The censure vote this afternoon on Congressman Gosar of Arizona, do you plan to vote for or against it?
I can't hear anything.
Okay, all right. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace there, Congresswoman. Okay, we'll have Congresswoman back at some point. Congresswoman, thank you. Thank you.